Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar organized by Fairtrade International and Fairtrade Belgium as part of the Fairtrade Talk series to learn about voluntary sustainability standards in the context of supply chain laws. My name is Chloe Mikolajczak and I will be the moderator today. I am a social and environmental justice activist based here in Brussels and I work mainly on policies that are part of the EU Green Deal. So we'll talk about the EU Green Deal because, as I'm sure you have noticed since the presentation of the EU Green Deal, there has been an increase of regulations that directly affect supply chains with the aim of making them more sustainable and fair. Some of the regulations have already been adopted, while others are still currently being negotiated, and some examples include the corporate sustainable due diligence, the ban on import of goods produced using modern forms of slavery, or the recently approved EU regulation on the prohibition of import goods that have contributed to deforestation. So these initiatives answer notably to social and environment imperatives, but also to a demand from consumers. But at the same time, voluntary sustainability standards, so we'll talk about VSS later today as well, have been trying to tackle these problems for years. So they've been working with frontrunners, but also local initiatives, and they have gathered as such extensive expertise and knowledge on what works, what doesn't work, how to perform checks and audits, and how to support change both at the company level, but also in producing countries. Which brings the following question that we'll try to answer today. In an increasingly regulated environment, what should their role be and how should it evolve? So the goal today is to have an open and transparent exchange with representatives from companies, producers, but also government representatives, and hopefully as many of you as possible. So those who are the first and foremost impacted by these regulations because they have to implement them or they have to support their implementation. We'll also discuss how voluntary sustainability standards, such as Fairtrade, have a role to play in this context of increased regulation to share their expertise and support an effective implementation of these new rules. So for this, we have a stellar panel of speakers today that I'm very glad to introduce. So I'll start with my left. So we have Pison Kukundakwe. Did I say it correctly?
My name is Pison Kukundakwe. I come from Uganda, a coffee producer organization called Ankore Coffee Producers Cooperative Union Limited.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Going to my right, we have Juan Pablo Solis, who is a senior advisor on climate and environment at Fairtrade International.
Pleasure, yeah. Pleasure to be with you all.
And then further right, we have, and I will try the full one. So we have Maame, Abena, Gyamerah. Yes. Great. Who's the first Secretary, Economic and Diaspora Affairs at the Embassy of Ghana here in Belgium. We did try to have a representative from a company, but we didn't manage to. So hopefully there are some among yourselves, and hopefully you will be willing to answer some of the questions. Speaking of questions and a little bit of logistics information, today's webinar will last for about 1.5 hours. So we will have questions with our panel for about an hour, and then we'll have 20 minutes of exchange based on your question, which means that we strongly encourage you to start asking your questions already using the Q&A feature that should be somewhere at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any logistical questions or any thoughts, feel free to use the chat function for this. The language will be English as well. So I think we can dive straight in already. And I'll start with a question that is for all of you, which is, can you briefly explain your experience dealing with EU sustainable supply chain regulations and/or voluntary sustainability standards? How are they affecting or supporting your work? Shall we start with you?
Yeah, thank you, Chloe. First of all, the experience we have is with Fairtrade and organic, because the cooperative is Fairtrade certified, it's organic certified, and we are recently Rainforest Alliance certified. Yeah, so these certifications have developed the organization in a sense that we are able to do production of good products of high quality that we bring to this EU market. We are able to get fairer prices comparatively and maximizing benefits to producers. We've been able to have direct access because we have an export license. Our coffee comes directly to the European market, and this has been facilitated by Fairtrade certification. We are able to get contracts. We are able to build long-term relationships with the partners in Europe and customers. Since 2008, when ACPC did the first export, we had customers that we still have to date because of this Fairtrade certification. Our farmers are able to get premiums that have developed the cooperative infrastructure. They now have their own processing facilities at the primary level and at the secondary level. The social development, we have been able to do a number of projects for these people. We have worked on schools, and now we have 3,000 people going to school, and this in a good environment that is conducive for learning, and thereby reducing the child dropout rate. We have been able to improve coffee post-harvest handling, and we have trained farmers in good and best practices, good agronomic practices, so that they are able to get production that is high, and also they have been able to improve productivity. Yeah, so SCPCU has invested relatively in organic fertilizer making, and this has reduced the cost of getting fertilizers for these farmers by 25%. We also run a scholarship scheme for the bright that are underprivileged, but they are students who can go to school and get good grades. To date, we have been able to pay for 44 students who have been helped to complete school. And all this is coming from the funding that we put apart from these premiums to be able to do these projects. So partly, this is what these voluntary sustainability schemes have helped us to achieve as an organization. And they have given us sustainability because we have been growing. We have not been going down, but we have seen the trend going up. Our exports are improving, certifications are improving, and even when you look at these laws, especially the new EU deforestation regulation, it is not going to find us nowhere. We are going to start from another step because we are, to a certain extent, prepared for it. Yeah. So some of these are not new to us. What will be new is some of the requirements, and putting them into practice and operationalization is what will be new for us. We have been able also, finally, to do sensitivity, sensitization, where we have a gender-sensitive environment free from discrimination, non-discriminatory employment practices. This is what we promote: inclusive workspaces, fair working conditions. Right now, if you visit SCPCU, many workers who started the organization, 90% are still there. Since 2008, they are still working with the organization because the working conditions are good and the environment is good. There is freedom of association of the workforce, conducive working environment for pregnant women, for breastfeeding mothers, and there is zero tolerance to sexual harassment. Yeah, the other arm that SCPC has been able to do with the Fairtrade is we have built a medical clinic that is open to farmers. We have more than 17,000 farmers. They access medical services without paying consultation fees, and the medical people are employees of the organization. So they are able to access the medical services. They get good attention, but at a subsidized rate. So it is possible. And then we do medical outreaches. Every time we have an annual general meeting or an activity of ACPCU at a primary cooperative, the medical officers reach out to these farmers. They test them for these non-communicable diseases and malaria, etc. Even in the COVID days, we partnered with government to do vaccination of our farmers and all the workers, and so on and so forth. So I would say these voluntary sustainability schemes have very high significance for us as a producer organization. We wouldn't be recognized without subscribing to this Fairtrade Otherwise, because we are a small cooperative, a small producer organization, so it has given us a platform to arise and actually be visible in the entire market, in the international market. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experience. Abena, same question. What's your experience?
Yes, thank you. And I must start by thanking the organizers of the event for extending an invitation to the Embassy of Ghana here in Brussels. Our acting head of mission would have loved to be here, but he's attending to equally important assignments. So you're stuck with me, basically, for
We're very
today.
happy to have you.
But yes, as an embassy, we have been reporting and following up very keenly on the regulations in particular, and trying to read through the fine lines and make the appropriate recommendations to the competent authorities in Ghana on how we can leverage the opportunity that it presents, but also address the challenges as well. And so aside the reporting and advisory component, we also do a lot of coordination. So we work very closely with the Ghana Cocoa Board, the Cocoa Marketing Company, the Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative, who was very instrumental in the LID. And then with the ministries that are concerned, basically, aside that, we've also been involved with advocacy and trying to facilitate some high-level delegations and meetings to ensure that our voices are heard at the right level to be able to incorporate the necessary input from at least a producing country perspective. And so for us, we've been, as an embassy, at the thick of it and also acting like a middleman, basically to ensure that the goal that we are setting out to achieve is done in a more pragmatic way. And we are very open to collaborating even more with agencies like the Fairtrade and other standard agencies, because we do see the importance and the other perspective that they bring and the support that they offer our smallholder farmers. And so for us, that's basically what we've been involved in.
Thank you. Juan Pablo, the same question, and maybe with a little bit of a twist. Obviously, the issues that these regulations are trying to tackle are issues that Fairtrade has been working on for decades. So how do you sort of see this articulation between these voluntary sustainability standards, such as Fairtrade, and these new regulations?
Thank you, Chloe. Well, very briefly on me, I'm Costa Rican. So I grew up actually in coffee lands. My family have been working in coffee many years. But I particularly started around 18 years ago working in different things, from managing portfolios, grants and finance to do research. And over the past 3 years working for Fairtrade as senior advisor for climate environment. So in Fairtrade, the standards, since the late 80s, we started looking into mechanisms for embracing fairness. The deforestation topic was actually started to be an issue within the system in the 2010s, more or less. So if you look back, you can see that in our generic SPO standard, there's criteria there since 2019 to protect and enable forest protection, protected areas, mapping areas. That has been an issue that is part of the DNA of Fairtrade.
I want to go back to the development of these rules, and I want to ask you, Abena, because you mentioned sort of the role a little bit that the Embassy of Ghana has been playing, but essentially these new rules, right, that are being developed and adopted by the EU have a direct impact on producing countries such as Ghana. So in a way, it's sort of the EU regulating other countries, right, and how commodities are being produced elsewhere. So what are your thoughts on this? And do you feel that throughout the process, the voice of producing countries has been heard enough?
Well, I would say now there seems to be an interest to engage more. So when we talk about throughout the process, not necessarily, but at least we are happy that setting, because initially it looked like we had to sort of knock down doors, but now, but even though it's after the fact, we do appreciate it, but we have to admit that it's after the fact, because when we are talking about a regulation that affects actors along the value chain, you would think that in the formulation of these policies and regulations, these actors will be consulted in a more extensive manner and not necessarily an issue of checking the boxes, you know, and speaking to one producing country and having it represent the voice of the whole. Because what we must admit is that producing countries are very dynamic and very subjective in how they approach setting things. So in terms of the involvement, now we see it, but it's after the fact, but we welcome it regardless. And we are very much open to more dialogue and consultation, and to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of responsibilities of actors along the value chain. Because at the end of the day, if these responsibilities are not well balanced, then if a lopsided value chain is not a sustainable value chain. And so we are trying to now push for more dialogue and see the outcome of these dialogues. We want to see setting measures and setting language, you know, refined to ensure that the appropriate consideration is given to the domestic issues within producing countries, so that it doesn't look like a unilateral benchmarking sort of situation, and then eventually something that we set out to be a good thing becomes a bit more discriminatory and almost punitive to some extent. And so now we're happy, and we would look forward to more and concrete actions afterwards, basically.
Yeah. And same question for you, Juan Pablo. When these rules were being developed, in your experience, are voluntary sustainability standards such as Fairtrade being consulted and asked for input? Because we said it a little bit in the introduction, and then you mentioned it. These are issues that you have been working on for a very long time, and you have the expertise both with companies but also with producing countries. So how was this process for you?
How is the process? So, the file of the deforestation regulation started to be in our more or less dimension late of 2020. So we have the Fairtrade system together with the Fairtrade movement have an office here in Brussels. It's the Fairtrade Advocacy Office. So they deal directly in the conversations and the negotiations of the different files, the proposals. And a Fairtrade Advocacy Office engaged with other NGOs here in Brussels, but also in the EU, to reflect on what is the role of smallholder farmers, why a regulation including the smallholders with the big, let's say, plantations, what is the role of indigenous populations, different elements that were providing, from our point of view, inputs into the conversation. Fairtrade also, 50% of our shares and decisions are being made transparent and are driven by the producers. The first 50% of everything we do is in consultation with producer organizations. We have the network in Africa, what Pison is working on, but we also have a network in Asia Pacific and Latin America and the Caribbean. So we send files to our colleagues in the regions to also collect their feedbacks, and then the consultation with the producer organizations that are members of these networks. And also we have the other 50% that is the engagement with the market. So the office here in Belgium that deals with the Belgian market, Fairtrade Belgium, but we also have similar offices in France, in Switzerland, in Germany, main markets here in the EU. So also with the national Fairtrade organizations, the ones that are deal directly with the market, we engage with the national authorities also to make the case that, well, there was elements in the regulation that should look into the different eyes of root causes of deforestation. Yeah. So based on that, after we in parallel work on our own analysis of standards and how we were preparing ourselves to enable that producers were ready to compliance with the regulations, and that's something maybe we can talk later.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your experience in the development process. Pison, going back to you, if I said the following statement, okay? Producers mainly bear the cost of compliance of these new EU rules, whilst benefits are only on the EU consumer side. Would you agree? And if yes or no, can you explain a little bit why?
My answer is yes and no.
Good one.
Yeah, first of all, reducing deforestation and forest degradation and systematically restoring forests and other ecosystems is the single largest nature-based opportunity for climate mitigation. And we are in support of this. In a way, we would also benefit because we are on this planet. The moment we don't have climate change, then we are happy because we are producers. Then we know that there is a future. There is a future for us. Yeah. However, there is a lot of work that we need to do on the ground, and this work is expensive. Yeah. So we need to look at the positioning of every stakeholder when it comes to this EU regulation or regulations. Yeah. So look at us as producers. We have farms. There are requirements. There are new requirements. It is not something we have been doing. They are telling us now we want to know the traceability of the farm. Now not only the coffee, but the farm. You need to have a polygon. We need to do geolocation. So there is technology, there is computerization, there is data. It has to be referenced somewhere. You see, many of our farmers, some of them are illiterate. All of them didn't go to school. When you come to Europe, you see people moving with iPhones. Everybody has a smartphone. They are on Google. They are following. But for us, we have those fast phones, the small ones with buttons. And I'm sure those are not the phones that will be used to get geolocation data and what not. So what are we going to do? We need to get new tools. We need to buy them. They are not available. So that is the cost. And then we need people who have the expertise to do this work on the ground. After that, we need people who will manage the data. Then we shall be audited. So that is the cost. It is the cost. It will take time. We need to have this transition into that, so we need capacity building so that we are able to move on the same level, so that we understand each other. We have a transparent system. When you ask where is this coffee coming from, then we are able to show you. It is from here. The farmer is there. You can find them. Okay? So I'm looking at that. So that is where I would say no. But the yes is the interest, because we are interested in having a better planet. Yes, it is in our interest. We want to produce coffee because it is the cash crop. I told you the other day that we have farmers who rely on coffee 100%. They have no other option. It is coffee. I will pay my medical bills. I will pay fees for my children. I will marry. There are those who say, no, I have to sell coffee to be able to get a wife to pay bride price. Okay? And everything. So they are 100% on coffee. So we would want to be able to sustain ourselves in the EU market. We don't want to be put aside, that we are not complying. But there is a cost. Yeah, so this cost needs to be addressed. Yes. So where is it going to come from? That is now the question.
And you're already starting to answer my follow-up question. But before we talk about the cost, and this is a question I'll have for everyone, it's also about who is expected to do this work. Because you mentioned indeed the traceability, for instance. So who will be handling this data? And what about intellectual property, for instance?
Yeah, so we need to have capacity building so that we are able to do this. We need trainings. For given the training, then we shall know what to do and we shall be able to do the implementation. Now, for instance, I can give you another example of the organic law. You know, it was also changed a little bit. It was scaled down. We needed to decentralize. Initially, as a cooperative union with the 32 cooperatives, we used to have one organic certificate. But now every registered cooperative organization, a single entity, needs to have its own certificate. So now from one certificate, we are going to 32 certificates. All these 32 will be audited. That is a fee. We have to pay that certification cost. And then the sampling fees. Every cooperative, they have to sample, they get maybe a soil sample of the leaves, sample of the cherries, they have to be tested in the lab, okay? So there is an increase on that. There is an increase on that. So we would be able to do that given that our capacity is built. But we also call upon support from organizations that have the resources, organizations that are able to train us, organizations that are able to work with us and keep us in compliance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we will get back to the cost because this is an absolutely crucial issue in a second. But I wanted to ask you, Abena, how does Ghana currently adapt to these regulations, or how are you preparing to adapt to these regulations, because some of them are still being discussed? And how do you see the articulation between the national laws and these new EU requirements that are sort of coming with a lot of, obviously, compliance issues?
Yeah, and I think I'll start off from reiterating what Pison mentioned about we understand the why. I mean, we're already member states of existing environmental laws, and we have been on a path to ensure that the commodity ecosystem is sustainable, right? And so even for Ghana, already the Ghana Cocoa Board has initiated the cocoa management system, which has the traceability component and everything. But I guess our reservations is the how. So we understand the why, but the how. And particularly for Ghana, it's about the timing, right? We are sort of having to fast track certain things, and that poses some concerns in terms of, well, how are we ensuring that there's an appropriate amount of awareness? And even when it comes to the legal issues, I know Obed mentioned the other time at the event about a consultant being procured to look at these things. But yes, that work is being done, but in terms of how certain legal instruments have to be revised, that still takes time. And then we're talking about bureaucracy and all the things that come with it in a developing country that is already concerned with other issues, right? So in terms of adaptation, first of all, we were already on the path. Our concern now is having to fast track the process, and that sometimes can be uncomfortable for producing countries like Ghana. But in terms of the why, we are totally on board. And so what we've been trying to emphasize in our advocacy is do consider what it means when we are being asked to meet certain deadlines and certain timelines. And even though support will be given one way or the other, it should be in a very, holistic manner, so that we are not necessarily being too quick to make certain changes. And we all know what the negative side of change when it's not done in the right way. So I think that's what I would say for now.
Thank you. And Juan Pablo, when you hear these, I don't know if we can say concerns, but when you hear these remarks indeed coming from the perspective of a producing country, but also a producer, on how this is going to happen, right? Not necessarily on the cost, but also on the how, the technical how, the people that are going to be needed, etc. How do you see voluntary sustainability standards, such as Fairtrade, for instance, supporting this work and this adaptation work to these new EU requirements?
Yeah, the how is super important. Thanks for flagging that. Because I think that we all agree that why this is important, and there's no discussions there. But the how is where we have been putting most of our attention. So I'm also very grateful for all the support received in consultations with multiple stakeholders in and outside the Fairtrade system, people mostly from universities. We have been engaging with them on best practices and for policies to reinforce sustainable purchases, to understand the root causes of deforestation, see how it's probably an issue of perverse incentives, how the market reacts in terms of premiums, or what we have in the system, like the minimum fair trade price, that sometimes is a struggle because we confront the voices in the market saying like, minimum price maybe is very expensive for us, and we say like, well, but the minimum price is the minimum to bear the compliance costs, right? So the how for us has been, well, I already mentioned, try to insist and advocate for laws that are mindful on the realities of smallholder farmers, but also on the standard setting. So again, as I mentioned before, we had the standards, the generic standard for producer organizations, talking about deforestation and forest protection since 2019. But we did an analysis of where we were like fully in compliance of, and that's why in the cocoa standard we add new criteria. For instance, we add issues like the first mile traceability. We also are requesting producers to report geolocation points in forms of polygons when the farm is bigger than 4 hectares, but also when there's identified high risk of deforestation, hotspots for deforestation. And we had a cutoff date that it's in line not with the EU DR, it's in line with our SPO standard. So our cutoff date goes a little bit beyond in time, 2018, not 2020 like the EU, to be concise with what we had in the SPO standard also. And we are doing the similar approach for coffee. The proposal went to public consultation, and the public consultation ended around October. And the proposal for like review these new criteria have been submitted. The standard committee is an independent committee that approved our new criteria and standards. Is actually sessioning next week. So I hope to have good news for coffee producers also next week. And then there's programs and projects that we have. And in programs and projects, I can continue with the list. We have the income diversification projects, the living income type of projects. Good examples in Ghana, for instance, we have as a project with Swiss retailers in Ghana. It's called Sankofa, where the whole idea in this project is to embrace agroforestry dynamic systems, diversification. But also in Uganda, we have a project I think is called Green, where it's also about reinforcing these aspects of agroecology, agroforestry systems, and enable the productivity, right? And to finalize, what we have been doing in the last, well, in the course of this year, we have been investing in pilots to understand how different technologies can be used for monitoring deforestation and to support producers in doing the risk assessment. And we are very happy to announce that we have assigned an alliance with Satelligence from the Netherlands. So we are going to collect the information from producers, but we are going to analyze that information together with Satelligence and provide deforestation alerts back to the producers. We know about the limitations of many producer organizations don't have access to these technologies. So we are investing to enable producers to have first-hand information for making decisions.
Okay. This is really great to hear, and I just wanted to follow up because we don't have a representative from a company, but if there had been one on this panel, you mentioned the support that you can provide, obviously, to a wide range of stakeholders, but for instance, for a company that wouldn't be a front runner, that would be starting in their journey, and that would feel quite maybe overwhelmed with all these new regulations, what is the sort of support that Fairtrade could provide, for instance?
Well, we have been engaging also in other type of discussions. For instance, OECD and FAO had this handbook on deforestation due diligence. We also provide our feedback there. We can use these type of materials to support, like advising the companies in that transition. We have been doing that with retailers that have knocked our doors, and we have been engaging with those companies that are willing to go one step beyond compliance. We think that in the Fairtrade standard, we are well covered to compliance with the EU regulation. And we want to go one step beyond, no? Like I mentioned, our cutoff date goes a bit beyond that. But also the programmatic support, it's developed in a way that goes beyond the regulation, goes beyond compliance. So what we are going to work now is in understanding, for instance, how we can group all these initiatives, living income type of projects, agroforestry type of projects, the deforestation monitoring, in a sort of a programmatic support program where retailers, traders, and other operators here in Europe can also look into and support not just one producer in one region, but try to support the entire region where there's particular areas at risk.
Thank you. And I'll go into cost because this is something that has been mentioned quite a lot, but just wanted to remind you that if you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature to ask them, and we will ask them to our panelists in, just looking at the time, in 20 minutes, something like that. So I want to go back to what you were saying. So you mentioned cost and you mentioned technical issues as well. Do you feel like you're currently sufficiently supported in order to implement these changes? And if not, what should change? Where should the support come from?
Yeah, we are not adequately supported. Yeah, because this is new. This is new, and we have just started the transition. And we also probably haven't seen certain costs that will come our way. Yeah, so we would expect, first of all, to begin with, such dialogues to continue so that we are able to speak, we are able to pay attention to the challenges of producers. So now you know, because we talk, we have this conversation. And so I would expect that Fairtrade or these other voluntary sustainability schemes to keep advocating for us to be able to get this support from, I think, partly, I would say, if we can have shared value in the whole value chain. We've been talking about coffee prices being good, because if a price is good, then the producer can afford. But if the price is not good, then we need to get extra support. Yeah, because when you look at the value chain, the value that is on top and at what the producer gets, what the producer gets is still small. So when you add on a cost, now it becomes worse. So if we can get a good price, then we would be able to pay the costs. But now that it is not yet a good price, now we would need extra support. Yeah. And what I would ask again is if we can be in touch with the country, EU, delegations, or other groups that have projects that would want us to comply. The support can come in that kind of way. Maybe Fairtrade can link us with them, make sure we are working together to meet this. But also, if it can be captured in a form of premium, you can say, if I am selling coffee, I get Fairtrade premium, I get organic premium, but what is the premium for this kind of compliance to deforestation regulation? Because it has its costs, they are there. Yeah. So if we can have that kind of premium, then it would be good for us. Yeah.
And that brings another question. Maybe we'll have time to discuss this in a second. But it was actually aimed for company representatives. But it's often said that products do not reflect their proper social and environmental prices, and if they did, they would be much higher. And so that brings the question of, should we change the product prices? And if so, how should these externalities be factored in? But maybe this is a question for in a second, because I wanted to ask you the same, Abena. Do you think the EU support for the implementation of this regulation is sufficient? And if not, should, for instance, official development assistance be used or increased for this purpose, or other streams, for instance? Is there anything that you can pinpoint that would be helpful to support?
I guess I would start by naming a few of the partnerships that have been now initiated. We have a Sustainable Cocoa Initiative, which is like a framework of partnership and technical assistance with the EU. And I mentioned the Ghana Cocoa Board initiating the cocoa management system, and the piloting of the traceability system, particularly in the Central region, is being supported by the EU. And aside the EU in general, we do have some member states of the EU through their development agency supporting. Is it sufficient? As always, we would love to see more. And particularly in the case of Ghana, we would even like to see the conversation expand to other commodities because they are equally important. We were discussing earlier before the webinar began about how, at least in Ghana's case, cocoa seems like the low-hanging fruit, but I think it opens up a bigger conversation of what does it mean for our emerging coffee, what does it mean for rubber, what does it mean for timber, you know, all those things. And so we would love to see that same support and initiative being taken on other products if indeed what we are trying to facilitate is a partnership and a mutually beneficial one at that. Yeah.
Same question for you, Juan Pablo. Do you feel like, I mean, from your experience seeing and being in touch with all these stakeholders, do you feel like there will be sufficient support, or do you feel like additional support will be needed? And we're talking mainly financial support right now.
In my conversations with EU delegates, most of them think that the EUDR is a law made for make the operators here in Europe to compliance. But at the very beginning has been one of the points now, make them realize that sometimes the decisions in the supply chain go down to what happens at farm level. So maybe I will not talk about the actions that the EU is taking now. Would like to talk about what actions companies can do now, because you mentioned the issue of costs. No, in coffee we reviewed the minimum fair trade price. It's going to be a year ago, and sadly to say, we haven't had the best experience in traders and retailers and roasters coping up with the minimum price, and it's a minimum price that sets again the minimum compliance costs, right? So commodity prices are very volatile. So here, one thing that I would like to mention to companies is that it's in their own scope of control to set the prices, to set the purchasing practices that they will put in supplying these commodities. And they can't be mindful of all these compliance costs. It's in the regulation, I think it's Article 30 that talks about the commitment to go beyond in risk remediation and investment. Not only the EU is responsible for that, also the companies have a quota of responsibility there. So I do think that, well, the regulation is here, is pushing us to do things better. My concerns are there, like for instance, how we ensure that people will not be left behind. Because there's the possibility that those producers that will not have the capacities to comply with either the technology or the information, etc., or they are not receiving sufficient technical support, will be left outside, in the access to market will be jeopardized. So how we can partner together to enable that no one is left behind.
And that's a really good bridge with my next question, which is based on your analysis of the recently adopted and the currently negotiated regulation. Do you feel like they're impactful enough, both in terms of checks, but also in terms of support? You sort of answered a little bit, but it would be great to hear your thoughts on this.
I think Pison mentioned was something that is very interesting, and that's something we have been hearing here in Brussels this week. The regulation is kind of punitive. It goes, if you don't comply, and you are in troubles, right? But if you are actually doing good, if you are restoring ecosystems, if you are investing in agroforestry systems, if you prove that you have not caused deforestation, what is the incentive? What is going to be the mechanism from the market to reward these elements, right? And this is probably what, again, I think the regulation in Article 30 have a very nice open for a window of opportunities to start thinking further. But I will also engage and invite market actors to look into how to reward ecosystem restoration, good practices, compliance, etc. So yeah.
And in your view, just and maybe this is a question actually for all of you as well. It's in your relationship with companies, notably, how have they been reacting to these new regulations? I don't know who wants to go first, but it would be interesting. Has there been usually some support for them, or more of a fear of not being able to comply? And as you mentioned, seeing them more as punitive rather than, encouraging companies. I don't know if maybe you want to follow up to your previous thoughts or Pison,
Yes. First of all, being a company that sells certified coffees, a producer organization that sells certified coffees, some of our buyers have started engaging us and also asking us, have you heard about this? This is what you're supposed to comply to. How can we work together? Can we support you on doing maybe risk assessment? How can we do this? So the conversations have started, but we have not gone so far.
I mean, I would agree with him on that. I think that there is definitely concern on the amongst the actors, and so there have been some background consultations on how we can support, but of course everybody understands the limitation in terms of what they are mandated, and especially from a government perspective where we're really talking about livelihoods and the impact on our economy, and then the companies also are looking at their own interests in terms of the profits and how to make sure that their business plan is workable, I guess. And so, yes, we have started the conversation, and we look forward to having a middle ground on how to sort of marry these somewhat opposing interests, but hopefully we can find a compromise in between there. Yeah.
Thank you. And Juan Pablo, have you heard any reaction?
Yeah, for companies, maybe something important, it relates to the power of data. I think Pison mentioned that it's difficult for producers to have data management systems, and that's the relation we have with intelligence is intentional towards that. We have decided not to share information with companies because the information actually belongs to the producers. So what is going to happen more or less is that we will receive the data sets from the producer groups. We will be cleaning those data sets, perform the deforestation alerts, and send that information back to the producer organizations. Okay. So if you're sourcing from a group like the one of Pison, then you at least have the confidence that the third-party verification standard have been there to manage the risks associated to deforestation. Yeah. And we don't think in selling data to companies is a good way, because also, first, it's not our data. We want to protect also the ownership of that. And also we have to make use of these mechanisms to empower the position of producers ahead in the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask Pison and Abena for a few, it doesn't have to be one, it can be more than one if you want to, but recommendation in the light of everything we've been discussing, what would your recommendation be for voluntary sustainability standards such as Fairtrade? So in the context of these increased regulations on supply chain, what are stuff that Fairtrade could do, I guess, to support you more or to support the implementation of these new regulations?
Yes, thank you. My contribution would be this, that they can support us in mobilizing these resources that we need to comply. Number two is to support us in capacity building. Yes, so that we are up to speed with what is required, and then we are able to do it. Then I would also request for information sharing. We need to have information. We need to be updated. We need to know what is going on. And then keep up the advocacy work. Keep advocating for us. Keep paying attention to the challenges that are faced by smallholders in line with the communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests. And also link us with the different programs and delegations and bodies that can fund some of the actions for us to be able to comply. But also, above all, to support us in securing better prices, because at the end of the day is what you get. If I do all this effort, what do I get at the end of it? Do I have a margin? Am I able to have a better life? Because our vision as a producer organization is to have a community in which our farmers are transformed into better individuals, progressive farmers. Yeah, but I would also ask that we maintain a partnership approach. This will help in achieving the objectives of these regulations. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll ask you, Juan Pablo, to react to these recommendations in a second. But Abena, same question?
Yes, I mean, I agree with him completely. And even to push the conversation also, like I mentioned earlier, to other commodities, right? And to also ensure that these actions that are being taken continue to build compliance of smallholder farmers and the products that come from producing countries, and not necessarily have to be another layer that, you know, producing countries have to sort of jump over to get those access. So we talked earlier about even adaptation. So how are these standards and certification programs being adapted to ensure that they don't become another barrier that producing countries and smallholder farmers have to cross? Yeah.
Lots of really good recommendations. Any thoughts, any immediate reactions on that?
What else can I say? I think that they have said it all.
I agree to everything.
Yeah, I will just mention that I've also experienced in the conversations with companies a lot of anxiety because time is rush. It's very limited. We have less than 12 months already to have everything in place and start reporting due diligence the 1st of January 2025. So I think that my last recommendation is just try to get over your fears and engage and partner with the producers and try to look ways in which in these 12 months we will enable trade to happen in countries like Ghana, Uganda, and other regions as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we'll move on to the question from the audiences. There's already quite a few coming in, but feel free to keep asking questions. So the first one is for you. So did ACPCU already calculate the effect of the new EU organic regulation will be on the price of your coffee? Sorry, let me see that. Since the union needs to be split in units of maximum 2,000 farmers and each unit needs sample testing. Very specific question.
Yeah, that is a mathematical question.
Yeah, very.
I didn't come with the figures for this particular session. Yeah, but yes, those details are there. We know now how much it will cost per cooperative in terms of workers, in terms of time, in terms of what is required. Yeah.
Juan Pablo, I have several for you, but the first one is on CSRD and CSDDD. Please don't hate us, these are EU acronyms. What role can Fairtrade play in supporting traders as well as producers in the upcoming CSRD legislation as well as in CSDDD?
Yeah. So the Corporate Social Reporting Directive, the first one, I think this one is already approved in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. The other one, the Corporate Social Reporting Due Diligence Directive, is in negotiation. So the Due Diligence Directive is where we are. Fairtrade has an office also in Finland that is our center of excellence for human rights and environmental due diligence. And they, together with the Fairtrade Advocacy Office here and our advocacy colleagues, are looking directly to this file to also, the same way we have done with the deforestation regulation, provide inputs from the different views, producers, the engagement with our NGOs, etc., etc. For the Corporate Social Reporting Directive, we offer a very comprehensive analysis of several risks associated in all the products we are offering in the certification portfolio. So if you look into riskmap.fairtrade, I can later give the details. There's an analysis of the several human rights risks associated, human rights and environmental risk associated to, for instance, purchasing coffee, cocoa, but other products like, I remember at this moment, like wine, carbon credits, quinoa, so the whole bunch of products that are there. That's one way. The other way is we have pilots in place for human rights and environmental due diligence in some of the places where we thought this testing these hypothetical approaches will be relevant. So also we can engage with my colleagues to learn more in what is the results, what are the learnings of these different pilots. And finally, a process that we have started this year, same way we have amended the criteria for deforestation regulations. We have been taking the generic standards, traders, plantations, and producer organizations to incorporate elements of environmental and human rights due diligence already upfront. It's the same discussion in the end because it's compliance. No? It's increasing the cost of compliance. So we also want to be very mindful of adding criteria that will be not generate an inflationary effect on producers, right? Yeah. But I think those are kind of the things we can discuss later.
And there's a follow-up question, which is probably something that a lot of people are wondering is, for you as well, is are there any standards that will include the guarantee, I'm guessing will include to guarantee the compliance to the EUDR?
Ooh, that's just a tricky one because the law is very clear. Certification and verification standard setters cannot be used for compliance. The legal responsibility lies within the operator, and the operator can use certifications such as ours and Rainforest Alliance and FSC as a risk analysis and risk analysis and remediation mechanism. Okay. But the fact that you are sourcing a certified product doesn't exempt you from the responsibility as operator. Okay. So legally speaking, no certifications cannot guarantee or guaranteed compliance because, well, that's how the law describes it. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I have one for you, Abena. What are the, I'm reading it as I go, so what are the developments within the African Regional Standard for Sustainable Cocoa in relation to EDR, and how can national regulatory bodies like COCOBOD support cocoa producers to avoid multiple geolocation deforestation reporting to different certification schemes, traders, buyers, government bodies, etc.?
Yes, I mean with Ghana, with almost everything that we do, we have a regional integration approach to it, and so even at the AU, these conversations are being had. And recently, the Ghana Commodity Exchange also was launched and whatnot. So in terms of how we are engaging at the regional level, we are actively doing so. And I think the last part of the question was what?
Was on how can national regulatory bodies like COCOBOD support cocoa producers to avoid multiple geolocation deforestation reporting to different stakeholders?
Yes. So like I mentioned, the pilot of the traceability system was launched, I think, a week ago. And so these pilot studies would indeed bring up what the limitations are, what the gaps are, what we should be looking to address in terms of the actual implementation. So we are in the process of launching this, and as we go along, we are very much open to learning the appropriate lessons to ensure that we are not duplicating efforts and ensuring a synergy in the systems that are being put in place.
I have another one for you. Will Fairtrade be checking for all geolocation, I guess, data of all farmers in a group? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part is, what would happen when you detect a farm that does not meet the deforestation cutoff date set out by Fairtrade?
Yes, so I mentioned before the first mile traceability criteria that we have added into the cocoa standard. That means that all farm units that are contributing to the same lot, to the same batch, to the same container, needs to be geolocated to ensure that there's a physical traceability in that first mile, from farm to the first point of collection or the first manufactured. From that point onwards, then it continues with the traceability systems that we have in place. So yes, all the farms that are going to be contributing to, let's say, the offer, the supply, should have the geolocation point. That's also part of the regulation, because if you don't have that information, you cannot access the market. No? And we do know that some of our producer organizations are selling to different markets also, most of them to Asia, like countries like Japan, Korea, or North America, Canada, and the United States. But despite that, we have added the criteria to ensure traceability, this first mile traceability, and that all farm units are geolocated. That means for us, maybe you can be like, I don't know, like maybe too much, maybe too little. It means that cocoa and coffee are around 1,000 producer organizations worldwide. So we have a escalonated process where we will start in Africa and Asia for cocoa, and then follow in some regions in Latin America for coffee, like Honduras. And then the second step will be like Latin America cocoa, and East Africa coffee, and Asia coffee. So we are going to be escalonating the information and the analysis. And again, we have 12 months to do that. So it's very few. And the last question is referred to...
What happens when you detect a farm that does not meet the deforestation cutoff date set out by Fairtrade?
So that would be a non-compliance with the regulation. So sadly, that producer should not be part of the, let's say, certificate. It will not be a certificate holder. That's a very sad news. That's what we said before about not leaving someone behind.
Yeah.
Many of the producers that have caused deforestation will be left behind. Not many, but maybe a percentage of it, because the regulation is looking backwards. It's going back in the past, asking for things that were nobody advised before. We have been taking measures, like for instance, the pilot programs we have in Latin America and West Africa show that there are very little cases of deforestation within coffee and cocoa. In Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, I think that less than 1% of that. And I think that is also part of what a fair trade producer means, no? Because it's a typical producer that have these elements already embedded in a way, no? But we are concerned about those that don't have access to the certification or to the support. But yeah, to be very straightforward, if there's a compliance on deforestation, if there's an alert on deforestation, and that alert is proved to be true, then it's a non-compliance, and that particular farm will not be included in the certification.
Okay. That's very clear, thank you. I have two questions that are more generic, so whoever wants to take it, and then maybe someone else can react. So the first one is about the one that I mentioned. So it's often said that product prices do not reflect the social and environmental cost, and if they did, they would be much higher. So do you think it's time to change the product price? And if so, how should these externalities be factored in, and by who should they be supported? That's $1 million question. Anyone wants to react to this one?
I guess everybody's hesitant to talk about pricing, but maybe I would give an equally generic answer. I guess from the perspective of producing countries like Ghana, in our advocacy, we've been emphasizing that there should be an equitable prioritization of the elements, right? So economic issues should not be elevated over social issues. Social issues should not be elevated over environmental issues, because within our countries, all these are equally important. And we're talking about people's livelihood, like Pison mentioned earlier, people depend on these commodities for their very lives, you know. And particularly in Ghana, there is a danger of a whole generation being lost because of the fact that these sectors are not as attractive as they used to be. So yes, we should continue the conversation on the pricing, and which is why within the Cote d'Ivoire Ghana Cocoa Initiative, the LID is very significant and important. In terms of whose responsibility it should be, I think all actors along the value chain should be involved in the conversation, so that just as we are talking about the EUDR and how consultation should be improved, these things are done taking into consideration an objective view of what everybody thinks and how they are approaching the situation, so that when solutions are being profit is not done from like a one-sided situation, because then that is not sustainable. So I would say yes, the agenda should be set and all actors should be involved in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else wants to react on pricing, or do we move on to the next one?
Maybe very little. I will actually thank Ghana, because what you are doing in West Africa, setting the issue of prices up front and the board, and also like it's a government commitment, and those type of commitments are very welcome. Also, we struggle in the market discussions to defend the minimum prices, because we do see the minimum price a mechanism to defend all the complexity. No? So just want to say thank you to you for on behalf of your home.
For the people, yes.
Yeah, I have a comment on price.
Yeah.
Yes, now for instance, the coffee prices for Robusta, we normally refer to the London Exchange, and for Arabica, we refer to the New York Exchange. So this is what I would have to say. In New York and in London, when these prices are being set in the exchange, for us to refer to, they should factor in all these things. That is point number one. Number two is, let us have fairer value distribution. If it is the producer that has a big cost, let them get the share that actually reflects their effort. And whoever is in the value chain, let everybody have what is fair. Let it be fair trade. If it is traceability, let us trace the price. Are people getting the right value for their effort? Yeah.
I think this one is pretty generic as well. How do you see the role of voluntary fair trade label evolve if every company has to comply to certain standards, such as the EUDR?
Wow, that's a tricky one. It's actually a question that we are asking ourselves. What is the role of the certification? What is the role of fair trade beyond just the verification? And maybe important to mention, yes, the standards and the certifications are probably, the label is probably why fair trade is known. Yeah. But fair trade is more than that. No? It's also the engagement, the advocacy efforts, the engagement with the researchers, the programmatic support. The three producer networks have something that is called the Producer Support Program. So projects like the one that I explained in Ghana and the one that I explained in Uganda are part of that programmatic support. So we do see ourselves playing other roles, not just the certification per se. We continue lobbying for better trade, fair trade practices in purchasing these commodities. And we engage with other commercial partners, traders, and retailers in developing and design projects that can go beyond just the sourcing practices, right? So we do see ourselves as a risk analysis and risk remediation mechanism for companies, not that can go beyond compliance.
A follow-up question for you, Juan Pablo, sorry, about the intellectual property rights. I think you answered that earlier, but the intellectual property rights of the data that will be collected, will Fairtrade share the data of cooperatives with company?
No, the data belongs to the producers.
Yeah.
I think that I explained that.
Yeah, that's what you said earlier. So I have two questions for Abena, but maybe can you speak a little bit louder, because apparently there's maybe the microphone. So Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire are working on a national traceability system, but this will not be a transparent system. Do you have some more information on this?
Well, is that an opinion of the transparency? Well, I can't speak much on that now because, like I mentioned, they are going through a pilot system. So hopefully, the findings from the pilot study would be shared, and then we can address issues of how to make it more transparent if it's initially not transparent enough. So yes, but I think that from a government perspective, we are definitely open to sharing as much information as we can to ensure that the dialogue is open and transparent. Yeah.
And there's two follow-up questions for you as well. I'll split it into, so how can CocoaBot make sure that the product they are going to sell to exporter will be EUDR compliant?
Yes, so the cocoa management system has been launched, and even at the regional level, we have the ARS, and which are all supposed to be complementary. And so, like I mentioned, we had already set out the path to ensuring that what the EUDR sets out to achieve, we were already on the path of achieving. And so we are just going to continue and ensure that these things are done in a very pragmatic manner, I guess.
Yeah. And the second one is, do you think that CocoaBot will provide required information to buyers so that they can submit the due diligence statement for EUDR compliance? Do you think that CocoaBot will provide required information to buyers so that they can submit due diligence statement for EUDR compliance?
I'm not sure I understand the question in terms of like the information they have from the farmers and then giving to the buyers.
I guess so. Maybe we can ask the person who submitted the question to clarify, but or I guess that's what they were trying to say. Yeah, probably.
All right. Well, we would try to fulfill all the requirements under the UDR and give the information, but of course, protecting what data we have to protect and also share the information that we have to, I guess.
Okay.
If I may very
Sure,
briefly,
of course.
people have to be mindful that there's data protection laws also in countries of origin. So, yeah, of course, people would like to have the data sets and share information here and there, but there's also data protection laws in place in countries like Ghana that needs to be also considered further.
Yeah. And we have a last one for you as well, which was partially answered, but maybe you can clarify. Will Fairtrade minimum price and premium be set higher when the latest version of FT standards comes into effect? So FT standards, to be aligned with legislation, comes into effect. How do brands and private label companies react to that?
Well, I mentioned that the minimum price for coffee was adjusted kind of more or less a year ago. The uptake has not been as positive. Many of the current buyers have lowered the volumes of trading on their fair trade terms because the C market, as Pison was mentioning, is very volatile. So the minimum price is a mechanism to ensure that there's some safeguards to prevent the exposure to the volatility in commodity prices. We have make an adjustment in the minimum price for coffee, considering costs of compliance with our standards, but other type of costs associated to, for instance, risks that are part of climate shocks and other type of elements that are there. But we will be engaging in a new revision of the minimum price for cocoa. We want to wait to see what is going to be the uptake of the new requirements in the standard. And then my cocoa colleagues are already thinking in ways to adjust the minimum price for cocoa. What drives me to this issue that we have been discussing this week as well, no? How commodity markets are going to be responding to this regulation, because there will be maybe an inflationary effect that will not be really reflected in the price volatility of the commodity, the C market, or the exchange in London. No? So also that could be maybe an idea to develop further with the EU. How then for operators in their purchasing practices, there are some criteria for mechanisms that can ensure that compliance costs are incorporated in the minimum price that they are paying to those areas where they source.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned that some of your colleagues are working on this. This is also something to mention. If your question hasn't been answered today, or if you have any additional questions, you can definitely reach out to the organizers of the webinar for additional information. I wanted to wrap up with a final round of any comments, any final recommendation, or any thoughts based on the topic of today. Anything that is still on your mind, or something that you want to come back to that was mentioned before. On this topic of increased regulation on supply chains and the role of voluntary standards, sustainability standards in that.
Yeah. Finally, I would say thank you to Fairtrade for inviting me and to represent producers in this. But also, I would say let us keep the collaboration and let's have a partnership approach. So that we are able to achieve together. It is a win-win. It is a win-win situation for both of us. At the end of the day, it is benefiting all of us. So let us work together, let us partner, let us keep exchanging, let us keep such conversations going on, and then we look for solutions together. Yes, because we have limitations. The people who buy coffee from us also, they also have some fears. As he was saying that already the response to the new fair trade price is not 100% good. Some people are shying away. Yeah, so let us work together and face these fears together as producers, as consumers, as traders, and other organizations that are involved, all stakeholders. I thank you.
Thank you. Abena?
Yes, thanks again to the organizers for having us. And I would just like to end on the note, as has been mentioned early on, that we definitely have to work together, like Pison is saying, but also to not approach it in terms of the novelty of it, right? We have to recognize that producing countries already have certain systems in place, and so whatever is being added on is supposed to be complementary, and so the competent agencies should be approached and engaged in a very objective manner in terms of what they have, and any recommendation should not necessarily be given in an adversarial sort of mode. And even with the companies and sometimes the dynamics that play in there, I think that we are all looking for a common goal, and for it to be as sustainable as we want it to be, there definitely has to be some, I think someone mentioned trust the other day, which is a very abstract element but very important in the conversation that we are having. And for producing countries like Ghana, at least, we are trying to make sure that all the grounds are covered, so not just for cocoa, but the other commodities as well. And so there's a lot of ground to cover, and we definitely need all the support and yes, assistance that is required.
Thank you. Any final words?
Let me think about final words. No. Well,
It feels very sad when you say final words.
final. Yeah, exactly. No. Well, maybe let me start. Well, when we were starting the conversation, we said that we all agree why this regulation is important. No? So I also think that the regulation also, even if we identified gray areas or areas that could be improved, like for instance the market incentive discussion, or how to ensure that those are going to be left out of market have the proper support. No, those elements take at least at me a bit of thinking further. I'm very much happy because this type of regulation have taken us, even in fair trade, have pushed us to do better and to do more. And sometimes we come to this also inertia of getting involved in conversation. But then now we have a law, and we have to do something to solve that out. So I'm in a way also happy that we have this type of conversations, because we know how, not we Fairtrade, we, the market, the the stakeholders around, we know how to collaborate, we know the solutions are there, science is there. As I mentioned before, I've been very humble receiving support from organizations like SIA, universities, also the engagement with the producers, the engagement with the boards, the engagement with the companies. There's willingness, and so let's use that willingness to really move forward, not just the compliance, but try to go beyond in the challenges that we have ahead with the climate crisis.
These were really great final words. They were very hopeful. So there were no final words at all. Like, they were final thoughts, let's put it that way. So thank you so much to all the panelists, and thank you who has been watching this. I hope you have learned a lot. I definitely have, and I know this has been recorded, so if you missed some bits or if you want to share it with your network, you will definitely be able to do so. So thank you again for to the organizers, so Fairtrade International and Fairtrade Belgium, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.